listen-only mode. Is there anyone who can see my presentation at this point? This is Bill Berger with New Horizons Computer Learning Center, and I'm going to be doing a presentation today on what's hot in Server 2012. We had a out of necessity, we had a schedule change, and so I expect there will be fewer attendees in this session than we would have had at a different time slot. But on the left-hand side, you should have some controls that give you the ability to ask me questions. I'm looking for some input. You see the screen. Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much. All right. Let's get going with well, first off, let's get going with the purpose of this presentation. Are you on the fence about Windows Server 2012? And do you need some motivation to step beyond your comfort zone? This is a real question. I've got a lot of background in the IT business, and I've been a trainer for New Horizons for very many years. And over this time, I've had periods where I was really excited about a new technology, and other periods of time when the new technology was just seemingly an incremental change from the technology we had before, and we could pretty much sit comfortably where we were and try to realize try to fully realize the profit from our move that we made earlier to the prior technology. And so I can imagine there's a great number of people out there looking at Server 2012 with its new interface and some of its new requirements and not quite sure as to whether or not they would like to jump into the Server 2012 environment. Does this meet anybody's or match anybody's condition right now? You could answer through the question section. Does anybody on this conference right now find some recognition in this on-the-fence status? Looking for feedback. Well, I hope so. I only have a few people in the call right now, but it's my dearest desire that you are the right people for this call. The people we're looking for are people who need some inspiration. This is set up to be a 45-minute webinar to highlight some of the more compelling reasons to embrace the new platform. Inspiration is my goal. This is not going to be a deep technical dive on anything. However, some of the terms that we're going to use are intended to be resonating with our tech geek audience. If you're out there already working in Server 2008, Server 2008 R2, you're working with Server 2003, and you said, you know, I haven't had a need to change since Server 2003. My goal here today is to encourage you to get excited about at least looking at some of these new features. I'm going to describe myself real quick. I am the geek on the other end of the connection. My name is Bill Berger. I'm also known as the Berger Man. And I've been a technical instructor and in the New Horizons family of instructors since 1996. I began teaching the Microsoft platform in the Windows NT days, but I originally started working with Microsoft stuff all the way back in the CP/M code before it became DOS. So I've got a bit of perspective here. I'm the technical training manager. I am part of the IT committee for the Southern California region. I've got a background as an independent consultant, IT director, Microsoft regional exchange expert. For some time, Microsoft would hire me to travel about the country and represent their Microsoft Exchange platform as a subject matter expert. You may have seen me at TechEd or some other events like that, speaking about some technical terms in a much more easily accessible manner. I carry a bunch of certifications, not just for Microsoft, but for ITIL and Lean Six Sigma and a whole hassle there. But as the ITIL and Lean Six Sigma should indicate, I do have an adoption or an appreciation for repeatable process. And one of the things I do like so much about Server 2012 is its ability to support those kinds of initiatives in our company, things that we can do over and over again without too much variation in the way they're executed. So, if this was a class on what's new and improved in Server 2012, I would have to say a whole lot. This here comes from a Technet article listed at the bottom. If you feel to move to jot it down, each and every one of these subjects has multiple pages of information on what is new about Server 2012 over Server 2008 R2, the prior newest platform. We really don't have time for all that. This is not about what's new in Server 2012. This is about top in Server 2012. Server 2012, if I break it down into my 5 favorite elements of the product, I would say we deal with the consolidation trend. It's up here in the top right-hand corner. It says cloud and clear. Yes, we are saying cloud on just about everything, and sometimes that word gets lost in the marketing hype about cloud. But from a technical perspective, there's a lot of excellent value we can leverage out of cloud or centralized processing or centralized computing. And we'll see that in just a little bit. Also, virtually unlimited is one of the subjects we're going to talk about. It has to do with virtualization. Talk about storage coolness. That one just amazed me. I do a lot of stuff with storage. I teach courses on storage. And when I saw what Server 2012 could do right out of the box without me spending $10,000 on a storage area network, I was really impressed. I'm not saying that you won't need to buy a storage area network. Your organization may want to go into that or may have already invested in that, but there's so much stuff that we would have done in SANs that we can now do in Server 2012 without investing a lot of time and money into a separate piece of hardware and software, a separate environment. Imagine that has to do with imaging. And I have a responsibility in New Horizons to push images out to a bunch of computers. And we've used many different technologies, including Windows deployment services. But my responsibility or my job to push those images out once we got to Server 2012 got so much easier. So that's a really cool feature for me. And then the last one, this is a bit of my own personal perspective. Microsoft seems to be making a concerted effort to what I call a sea change in security. There's been a way we've handled security, specifically administrative security, for more than a decade. And we have been converting to a new model for security since then. And this furthers that new model. So if you want to embrace the new Server 2012 takes you a long ways in that direction. So let's talk about that consolidation trend continues and this word cloud. I know you've probably heard cloud attached to everything. I've been looking at some joke items that show a bottled water, a clear plastic bottle with water in it. It says, water made with genuine cloud technologies. The idea is that if you say cloud enough times, people will think it's special and it's magic and that it'll be more valuable. Well, if you're an IT professional, you've probably gotten pretty tired of the overuse of that term. But really what we've done is we've taken the concept of consolidation past our traditional data center. Originally, we were very distributed in Microsoft deployments. Individual servers, a lot of functions on the individual clients, and we've been trying to, over the generations, get more and more control. We use System Center, a configuration manager, and a bunch of other features to bring together the manageability of a large spread apart network, or even a medium-sized network with multiple servers. Well, in Server 2012, we now have the ability to manage servers as groups of servers. If there's a feature that you want to implement on all of your IIS boxes or all of the servers running a particular type of service like DFS or file and print services or any number of things, you can create a logical group of those servers and apply the changes directly to those. You can do that in Server Manager as well as doing it through PowerShell. Now, just a little trick or a little tip to know about Windows Server 2012, it's all about PowerShell. Everything we want to do that's really amazing and cool is going to happen through PowerShell. And it does feel for some people like a step backwards that we're going to the command line, but it actually gives us some incredible powers, capabilities that we've not been able to do in the past. So with that PowerShell background, we add this graphical user interface in front. They kind of look and play like web pages, where you say, this is what I'd like to have accomplished. Make it happen. It composes the PowerShell script in the background, and it runs it through PowerShell. What's nice about that for repeatable processes kind of guy is if you're doing something over and over again, it may take 9, 10, 11 mouse clicks and some text typing through these forms to do it through the GUI. But when you're at the very last stage, you have some PowerShell text that you could capture and use as a script later. So how hard is it to create new users and associate mailboxes when a person is joining your organization? Well, it's not real hard. It just takes a little bit of time. Well, let's automate that so that somebody maybe in the human resource department could launch a script that would take care of that for you, take some of the day-to-day drudge work off the IT team, and give IT more time, more clock cycles to do the more interesting and business-enhancing features that IT could be capable of. Then we work over the term cloud as it's intended. Things like software as a service and platforms as a service and infrastructure as a service, these things are relatively new. They are part of the last 5 years, maybe 10 years, but of leading edge or bleeding edge deployment of computing capabilities. And if you were trying to do it with the last model of server, you would have some difficulty in managing it. The current private cloud allows you to use certain fixed hardware assets in your company to provide exactly what a particular project needs on a particular schedule. Maybe you want to figure out if this new software will work for you, and somebody named Bob needs access to 3 SQL servers, a domain controller, and they need an IIS server and 5 clients. Well, you can create a self-service environment where a user could choose, an authorized user, to choose what they need to test out their project and automatically deploy all the products that are necessary in your private cloud. You don't have to be doing this out in the public cloud. You can be your own internal private cloud provider for products just on demand, just as you want them. The public cloud, of course, is Azure. We have Azure integration with our Windows Server 2012 tools, and I'm going to show that on the next slide. One of the screen captures I did was Server Manager. It has the first thing you see when you open up Server Manager is this dashboard. And in fact, in my experience with Server 2012, I pretty much live in Server Manager. I don't really need a desktop environment for server. We have the option of not having a desktop environment and thinning down our attackable services. When I launch a copy of server or log into server, I get Server Manager. If I want to configure my local server, I select the local server. If I want to configure servers other than my local server, I go to All Servers, and I add to my dashboard or my management console any number of servers I want to manage. I can do this from one seat. I can do this from Anaheim and configure servers in Beijing. I can do it wherever I need to be across my organization in a single location. The fact that somebody is potentially in an Azure cloud or somebody is running on physical iron inside of your internal organization is rather invisible to this management console. If this box needs to be modified, I can just choose it through modify it through one tool. The other thing that I've got an arrow pointing to here is this idea of creating a server group. Server groups are logical groups that you would do just like with users. I could say, here's a group of users, and I'll call them sales. And maybe I want to give certain sort of settings for all my salespeople. I apply it to that group. I could do a group policy or what have you. But here, I can say, here's a group of file servers in a particular region, and I want to apply this setting to all those people. We could have done some of that through organizational units and using group policy, but here we're not building a group policy. We're simply using the regular administrative dashboard we select the group, and we apply the change to every machine in the group. Much, much, much better consolidation of administrative efforts across a large network. Virtually unlimited. All right. Server 2012 has really two primary versions. There's the standard version and the data center. There are other versions that are used for special functions, sort of like a back office version of the old days, and a version that can be sold to OEMs for making a storage device. But as far as an admin is concerned, there's really two versions, standard and data center. There is no more enterprise. It used to be in the older platforms, standard gave you limited functions, and enterprise gave you a great deal of additional functions. Now, whether you're standard or data center, you have the exact same functionality. We flattened the product line. If you want to do clustering, you can do it in standard. If you want to do some pretty amazing, fancy stuff, you can do it in standard. You don't need to buy an enterprise or a higher-end copy of the server, which pretty much protects your investment in that server. What's nice about data center is, and the only true difference in data center, is that data center allows you to host an unlimited number of virtual machines, right? As well, it is technically limited by the amount of power your machine has. You can't put it on a really tiny computer and expect to run 10,000 virtual hosts, but you wouldn't be stopped by any virtualization licensing from putting 10,000 virtual hosts. The machine is capable of hosting as many virtualized devices as you want. And since we're talking about virtualization, we're really talking about some things that take place in Hyper-V 2012. That's the new virtualization platform. And really, where do we begin to talk about the improvements in Server 2012's generation of Hyper-V? Really not enough room on this slide, so we'll go to the next one. Hyper-V 2012 upgrades, the biggest one, the one that is at the core of so many new features, and new functionality of the product, is now we can, with our product, not with that other team's product, we can move virtual machines from one physical device to another physical device without any downtime. So this they call this live migration. So maybe one machine is failing in a cluster, we can move it over. Well, we've been able to do that before. This is on the fly. I think this IIS box, this web server box, would be better served sitting on host number 2 than on host number 1. Or we want to put it on host number 7 instead of host number 2. Whenever we choose to move the virtual machine from one place to another, it will do a live migration. It will create a new instance of the virtual machine in the other location. It will synchronize the RAM. It will synchronize all the transactions that are taking place. And once the two machines are running identical, handling the same sets of transactions, it will, in the background and totally transparent to the user, change the connections from one virtual machine to another. So a user that has a current connection to virtual machine sitting on host 1 will not drop their connection when we move them to a different host. So why is that so cool? Well, not only does it give us great things for server durability and such, but it allows us to do stuff that I choose to call dynamic provisioning. It's a term that was kicked around for a long time. I don't actually see it in the Microsoft text, but dynamic provisioning is where we can change the number and location of virtual machines based upon load and power management. So if I've got 3 hosts handling a dozen virtual machines, and it looks like none of those hosts are really heavily loaded, the actual host machines are running at about 30% of their resource utilization, and they're just, chugging along, burning electricity, I don't necessarily need those 3 hosts. I could take the dozen machines and I can move them onto 2 of the hosts and shutter that 3rd one. I could power down that 3rd one. I could take it out of the mix so it doesn't generate heat and chew up electricity and all that cool stuff. Now, at another point, if I have got a need because those first two machines are reaching 60–70% of utilization, I could spin up another host and I can move virtual machines from these overloaded servers onto other servers that aren't overloaded, all on the fly without any interruption to the user's experience. Beyond that, though, I've got one more thing that I think is very cool. If I have, let's say, what they call an N-tier application, and at the front end we've got some sort of a web service that is presenting web connections to the outside world, and let's say your product or your company just got hit with a major marketing coup. One of these talk shows just did a little blurb on you. Maybe you showed up on Oprah's book club, or you went viral on the internet, and now there are millions of people hitting your servers. Well, your existing IIS boxes that were capable of handling your regular load might become stressed, and you might need additional IIS boxes to handle this peak surge of connections. Well, we could, in the past, build these machines ourselves and stand them up once we noticed a failure of our existing infrastructure, but dynamic provisioning allows it to happen automatically. You could monitor that your existing IIS boxes are getting close to giving you a service level interruption. You're going to fail to meet your obligations, and it'll build generic IIS servers, stand them up on other virtual machines, fully configured, and they'll start accepting the connections and taking the stress off the overloaded boxes. When the fad goes away, when the large amount of chatter from the blogosphere goes away, then it will harvest back those automatically provisioned virtual machines. Very cool. In order to make that happen, though, you need to bring in a lot of additional features. Those features are available in the System Center family of products. So at the bottom of the slide here, I put in stuff about System Center 2012's Virtual Machine Manager, Orchestrator, Operations Manager, Service Manager, and for some reason I missed Configuration Manager. That should be in there. If you are looking at Hyper-V 2012 and comparing it with another vendor's hypervisor solution, and you're thinking at all that this free Hyper-V Server 2012 is anywhere inferior to this other vendor's product, I'd really like you to compare it, not just the free version that comes with the operating system, but look at the additional features that show up with Virtual Machine Manager 2012. When you combine the Hyper-V that's part of Server 2012 and System Center Virtual Machine Manager 2012, you have a very, very compelling case to use Microsoft's product over anybody else's product. So again, take a look at what's new and exciting. As far as physical and logical hardware capability, there is a ton of upgrades that came out in 2012. Our virtual machines can have more processors than they ever did, larger amounts of RAM, bigger hard drives, all kinds of storage coolness, and we're going to talk about that in another slide. So my storage coolness, easy to deploy iSCSI. If you're an IT person and you deployed iSCSI in the earlier operating systems, you'll know that it was not necessarily the simplest thing to do. There were a lot of steps, and there was a lot of room for there to be a challenge or to have a failure. When you do iSCSI in Server 2012, one of my most frequent responses in the classes that I teach is that it? Wow, that's too easy. I mean, we can set up a iSCSI environment across traditional network storage without a SAN, with using your own current investment, just with the tools that are inside of Server 2012. If we're talking about Hyper-V, we have a virtual fiber channel. So if you prefer fiber channel over iSCSI, you can use that fiber channel environment in the virtualized environment. There's a really, really, I don't know, maybe I'm just such a geek that I love this feature too much, but this really cool feature is called storage spaces. Storage spaces allows me to do things that in the server that I could have never done without purchasing a ton of storage area network capacity. Storage area networks, there's nothing wrong with them. We call them SANs, and I like to call this a sandbox. Over the right side it says, welcome to the sandbox, home of all the cool toys, or some of the cool toys anyways. But you're buying storage capacity, hard drives, disk cabinets, network attached storage, what have you. You're investing in some sort of a SAN fabric, which is dedicated switches and routers and all kinds of infrastructure, and then you're creating these SAN or these SAN target servers that allow you to present logical units to the rest of the world through this dedicated little cloud of secrecy. We often have our organizations broken up into different silos, and the SAN silo is typically a different set of skills than the rest of Microsoft skill sets. You would be on the Microsoft team and ask for somebody who manages the SAN to build you or make available to you a group of storage. They would present you a logical unit. Now, right within Server 2012 and using storage spaces, we can create these logical objects that are fabulous. You create a storage space as just my first storage space. In that storage space, you attach as many types of hard drives as you want. Different sizes, different speeds, different technologies. They all can live in one storage space. And then inside that storage space, you create a logical storage unit. You create, for lack of a better term, you create a hard drive. And I'm going to say that this hard drive is 2 terabytes in size. And when you write to this 2 terabyte hard drive, this storage space decides where that file is going to go. On one disk, on another disk, on another disk. You're not creating a RAID stripe of disks. You're not mirroring the disks. You're not hard locking these physical disks together. You just created a whole team of disks that are all capable of storing data for any object you put in storage space. And then what we do, which is pretty darn cool, is we decide that maybe for fault tolerance, I want every file I write to be written to at least 2 physical disks, so that if one disk goes, I have another one for backup. Or maybe I say I want all the storages I write, all the files I write to be written to 3 physical disks, and it'll do that. It'll write them to 3 physical disks. We can also build a storage hard drive, a logical hard drive, that is bigger than our actual storage space has resources for. The idea being this: if I have a project and I think I'm going to need 10 terabytes of storage, if I go to buy the 10 terabytes of storage in September 2013, it's going to cost me a certain amount of money. But if I don't expect to use more than 2 terabytes of storage between September and December of 2013, I could buy that 2 terabytes of storage, associate it with my storage space, but create a 10 terabyte drive. It will lie. It'll tell the world that it's capable of holding 10 terabytes. But once it starts getting close to the 2 terabyte limit, you're going to want to, on the fly, add additional disks to your storage space. Something that we can do in a SAN, not something that we would ever been able to do in the Microsoft operating system. We get this both in Server 2012 and Windows 8. I haven't had a need for it on the client yet, but on the server it's just truly brilliant. Resilient File System, the REFS. This is a brand new file system that is coexisting right now with NTFS. But the Resilient File System eliminates several sources of corruption or failure that have occurred in the past with NTFS. We've had more than a decade's worth of fixing NTFS through different versions, making it as cool as it can be, but we've reached some limits. We've reached some limits for storage volume size, the number of partitions, and other logical functions. Resilient File System creates a much more reliable, durable, and resilient space, as the name implies, for you to put your data. Data deduplication. It's a fancy word. It's getting a lot of trendy speak, and there's a lot of people who spend money on software packages and other tools to do data deduplication. The concept here is at the block level, and I'm getting kind of geeky here. When you write data to the hard drive, it makes patterns of ones and zeros across lots of blocks on the surface of the disk. And if I write a file, it takes up a bunch of space and it takes up a bunch of patterns of ones and zeros. Now, if somebody else writes a different file, it makes another block of space, a whole bunch of space, lots of little blocks with ones and zeros. Now, if, let's say that I created a file and I called it fourth quarter earnings report, and somebody else created a file that was fourth quarter earnings report, the old file level kind of data deduplication would say, I don't need 2 copies of the exact same file on my hard drive. I'll just put one. I'll lie and tell both people that they have their own copy. So we save one of those, we'll save the disk surface for more storage. But with data deduplication at the block level, what happens is you could write a document that was a letter to mom, and I could write a document or create a document which is a fourth quarter earnings report spreadsheet, completely different files, but in them, any one of the blocks might have the exact same pattern of ones and zeros. The file's not the same, but the blocks might be the same. And any block that is exactly the same between your file and my file is taking up duplicated space on the disk, and it doesn't need to be there. So we can get rid of duplicate blocks, and then we can create an index that says, when you want this pattern, go read this one instance of the block. What this really allows me to do is to back up data and move data and restore data much more quickly. We'll report that we have 2 terabytes worth of data on the volume, but really all we have is some 1.4 terabytes of data on the volume, and we've saved 0.6 terabytes. Speaking geek, I know that doesn't appeal to some people, but if you are looking for something to get excited about, that should be something to get excited about. One other thing that the hard drives are capable of doing now, that file service is capable of doing, that we didn't have before, is called access-based enumeration. If I share stuff in a Microsoft network, I create a share, it's on a server, it's a file share, and I've got 20 people who have the ability to access that share. What they will see when they look inside that share is a list of all the items there. Now, some of the items they may not have any authority to use. They can't open them, they can't read them, but they'll still see them. They won't know there's a problem with their security until they try to access it and say, sorry, you got to talk to somebody who has access to this file. Access-based enumeration seems like a fairly small thing, but it's great for reducing your attackable surfaces and increasing the effectiveness of your user force by not showing them any file they don't have access to. So if you don't have access to the file, you go to the folder and you will only see a list of those files that you do have access to. So if we've got a combination of stuff in the same share that has marketing and sales data, it's all in one great big bucket. The people in the marketing department will see the marketing stuff. The people in the sales department will see the sales stuff. If somebody in marketing shares something to somebody in sales or gives them permission over the file, suddenly it's visible. I didn't have to send them a separate copy. They can see it in the common share. So access-based enumeration is pretty slick. All right. I see a question. Somehow I'm doing my best to see, actually read the question, but it's really small in my format here. So see how I can get to this. You have issues with usability and manageability, and don't even go to Hyper-V. Microsoft is in the dark ages when VMware has surpassed the Jetsons. What I really want to know is if you could spend more time on the replication advances with Server 2012, like double take. Well, actually, I didn't put that in my presentation, but double take is very good. And I would hazard or encourage you to look at Hyper-V with the virtualization manager relative to your Jetsons analogy. I have absolutely no disrespect for VMware. We are a VMware training company as well, and this is a product we support and we love. But I encourage you to look at the elements that Microsoft has introduced that may be a little bit more sophisticated than you've seen before. One of the later, another area in the presentation I covered is Imagine That. And that has to do with the Windows deployment services as they appear in Server 2012. We've got improved multicast deployment. If you're pushing images out to multiple targets concurrently, they have a much better way of staging the multicast than they've done in the past. There are similarities to some of the improvements that were made, well, how do I put it better than that? There are enhancements over some of the improvements we saw in Server 2008 R2. If I've got a fixed number of machines that I image regularly, which I do in the classrooms, then I don't need answer files, I don't need a bunch of other stuff to automate the deployment. Machines will be recognized based on their MAC address or based on their unique, globally unique identifier in Active Directory, and when the WIM file is dropped on top of them, the image file is pushed out, they stay members of the domain, they have their old IDs, they are pre-configured at that point without having to do a lot of customization. And it allows me to package a single robust or fat WIM if I want to. It allows me to have multiple hardware configurations that I deploy to. It's great when I have a common platform and every machine that I'm sending an image to is the same. Everybody's imaging product works terrific in that environment. Microsoft's imaging products in the past, or other vendors' imaging products in the past that we actually still use in some instances, require me to have different images for different types of machines that I'm sending my data to. I build now a fat WIM file, and it's close to the out-of-the-box experience. No matter what type of hardware the image goes to, it's going to find drivers, it's going to put it on a vendor A or a vendor B system using a common single file. Another nice thing about the way the files are deployed through Windows Deployment Services, and this is slightly geeky, is that when we push out that image to a whole group of machines, those images can start to be applied to the machine as they're being transmitted. So I don't have to wait for the install file to be pushed off the server to the client machine and then have the client machine start consuming it and becoming a new operating system. With very little impact on the application process, I can push, and as they receive their data, the machines can start to become the machines they need to be, which for me is a great time enhancement. All right. The security sea change that has been in the works for a number of years and is becoming increasingly obvious is the difficulty using the last decade's form of security to meet some seemingly impossible administrative boundaries. The joke I put up here is we need Jerry to have full administrative control over all the color printers on the second floor of Building 12 every other Thursday. I mean, how do you do that? That's crazy. But suppose you have some very fine, very specific levels of control we need to give our administrators. In the old days, going all the way back to the NT days, and if you were an administrator, you had an S on your chest, a red cape down your back, and godlike power over your network. And if you weren't an admin, you didn't have that power. You were all or nothing, either admin or not. Now we have domain admins that can do this, and enterprise admins that can do all of this, and I have printer admins that can do this. But we keep getting increasingly fine-tuned security requirements. Maybe you're in a HIPAA office. Maybe you're in a Graham Leach Bliley office. You've got certain requirements that are dictated by law that you create these segmentations. Well, our traditional model based on access control lists, access control entries, SACLs and DACLs, the discretionary and the system access control model, is very, very hard-pressed to meet some of these imposed security obligations. We wind up creating an extraordinary number of groups and a very complex group model, and then a large number of organizational units. And we use delegation of control authority to give specific access to certain attributes of certain objects. If you're a member of this group, or if you're not a member of this group, we deny this. And it gets really very difficult to comply. PowerShell, when it comes to administration, works with a verb. We're going to get something, or we're going to set something, or we're going to move something. We're going to do something. There's a verb. There's a noun, the thing we're going to get, or the thing we're going to move, or the thing we're going to change, or the thing we're going to create, or any of that stuff. And then there are conditions that say, okay, we're going to do this to these that meet these conditions. And when we're writing things out in PowerShell, if we're a script person or if we're a command line junkie, then we can do a lot of really powerful things. But with what's called role-based access control, we have evolved our role-based access control to the point where we very stringently can control which verbs an admin can do against which nouns and under which conditions. So if I say, I want you to have these functions over these objects, but only if these conditions are being met, I can do that with role-based access control that I can't very easily do with our traditional access control lists. Now, because our administrative consoles are all moving away from what's called the traditional MMC and in favor of these web-like interfaces that run PowerShell commands behind them, we get the ability to enforce the administrative authority and administrative control through role-based access control, even when we're using our graphical user interface. So our users can click on, our admins can attempt to do something, but be denied at the execution because they don't have sufficient privileges. And then we can very granularly create the additional privileges. So enhanced silos. We separate our administrative authority into additional silos. And then, but wait, there's more. Call now, operators are standing by. All these other areas that we can talk about that are enhancements of Server 2012 that didn't meet my short list because of my 45-minute time limit are things that we can teach you about, we can help you with at New Horizons. We've been doing this for some time. One of the nice other features that we show is we have the return of the MCSA and the MCSE. Right? We used to go MCSE for systems engineers. Now they're experts instead of engineers, but they're still MCSEs. And I like to joke about now with matching numbers. If you're planning on taking an exam, you've got a series of exams listed in my right-hand column and a series of matching courses that map to those exams in the left-hand column, and look at the nice matching of the numbers. 410, 20410 matches the 70- 410, 410 exam. So I've been talking fast and furious for 43 minutes and 20 seconds now, and I've had a lot of things that I wanted to tell you, but hopefully you were less on the fence about Server 2012 than you were before. But if you're still on that fence and you need more information, you can contact your local New Horizons Computer Learning Center. And as I said before, we've pioneered the technology training from more than 30 years ago, and we've never stopped. We still do it. If there's new technology that needs training on, we're your training partner to have that, help you get that done. The very last slide I've got for you is a post-class survey slide. One of the things we do to be compliant with Six Sigma and all kinds of other great practices is a process of continuous service improvement. And what we want to do is get from you, whenever possible, some information about whether we hit this home run and hit it out of the park, or whether we fell short of your expectations. What you give me today in the Metrics That Matter survey will definitely be read, and it will be applied to the next survey or to the next seminar, webinar, to make sure it's even that much more close to the mark of what you want to hear. So I'm encouraging you to go to www.metricsthatmatter.com. There's a /, and this string at the end is a little hard to read, but it's I believe somebody intended it to look like Orange County. It's RNGE 36CTY. If you click on that, you'll be taken to the Metrics That Matter website, and you'll get a chance to pull from our current class list a class that's called, or an event that's called What's Hot and New in SERV 2012, and Berger, the Burger Man, is the person delivering it. Find that, click next, and tell us what you thought. Thank you so much for your time. I've hit my 45 minutes. It's 45 minutes and 20 seconds now. And strangely, what I've got to do right now is go back and teach more Server 2012 to a room full of people who are having a great time at New Horizons. Thank you so much for your attention.